Hello everyone, just wanted to welcome you to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about the Windows 10 certification changes from Microsoft and the impact that that'll have on courses and curriculum that you may be teaching to. I'm Adam Keys, I'm the IT product manager at TestOut and would like to introduce our speakers today. We will have Ken Sardoni. He is our Vice President of Course Development. He's been with us for 4.5 years, and prior to TestOut, he held executive positions in IT at Oracle and Stenton Technology Group. He also has a background in curriculum development, academic leadership, and faculty at University of Denver and University of Phoenix. And his role here is to guide course development teams as they create TestOut's technology training products. We also have Craig Jenkins, who leads our IT course production teams here at TestOut. He's been here for 8 years. Prior to TestOut, Craig was active duty with the Navy. He also spent 18 years working at Novell in various capacities. And one recent thing that stands out is he just retired as a colonel in the Army Guard and Reserves, where he had the pleasure of teaching many of our future leaders. Some administrative things before we get started. We will have poll questions throughout this webinar, so please stay attentive and keep ready for those. We'll open them up for just a minute so that you can record some answers as we learn about you and learn about the needs that you have. We will also have questions at the end. We'll have a question and answer session, but on the GoToWebinar pane that you have open, there is a question tab where you can submit questions at any point during the webinar. Encourage you to do those. I'll be on here answering some of the questions that apply to you personally. And if they apply to everyone as a group, I'll hold those to the end so that Ken and Craig will be able to answer them for us. There is also a handout in that same pane that talks about the changes from the Microsoft 7698 and 7697 exams to the MD100 and MD101 exam objectives. So I encourage you to take a look at that, download it to your machine so you have it as well. And with that, I'd like to turn the time over to Ken to get us started, and here's Ken Sardoni.
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate it. To start our webinar today, we would like to give you a couple of poll questions to respond to so that we can get to understand who you are a little bit better. The first poll question is, what's your primary role in your organization? And the second poll question is, do you teach a Windows 10 course? So we'll give you a minute here to go ahead and answer those poll questions. All right, are we getting good responses? Everyone's responses coming in?
And on that first question, it says, what is your primary role? And on your screen, you'll see most of you, 60% are instructors. We have some administration, 20% of you about are both, and then some others. And then we'll open up the second question. All right, so looks like 80% of those on are teaching a Windows 10 course.
All right, thank you, Adam. So as we start our webinar today, what we want to look at is what's changed with Microsoft and with their certifications. And we're hoping to give you a sense of what changes you might have to introduce into your course as you teach your Windows 10 client courses. We also want to talk about what motivated the change for Microsoft, especially as Microsoft starts moving with their certifications from a more pure Windows 10 client local administration to in-cloud administration. And as we go through our material, that will help you to see some of those changes, and we'll give you information for what you need to look for and what you need to do to potentially change your courses. We also want to talk about the modern desktop administrator architecture. Microsoft is pushing that architecture, and it's pretty clear to see that in how they've changed the certification. So we want to talk about that. Then we want to look at what does the platform look like, especially on the cloud side. Many of you that are teaching perhaps may not have moved into some of the cloud-based software, particularly Intune, Autopilot. We want to give you a sense of what that looks like as you're starting to plan how might you approach teaching that. We want to talk about what objectives Microsoft dropped out of 697 and 698 as they created the new MD 100 and 101 exams so that you can determine what information you might want to move out of your courses, what objectives stayed the same, and then what are new. And then we'll look a little bit at potential objective and course material coverage that you may want to consider with your course. So the first thing, what's changed, as most of you know, the exam 7697, Configuring Windows, was retired in April, and 7698, Installing and Configuring Windows 10, was retired in March. Again, as you think about 697 and 698, the focus for configuring Windows devices and installing and configuring Windows 10 is it's really directly related to on-premises types of administration in the Windows 10 environment. And so you'll see as we move to really the MD100, Windows 10, that's a lot of the Windows 10 administration. In MD101, Microsoft really moves to managing the modern desktops. And so you'll start seeing their movement into more of the cloud-based architecture and cloud-based administration. And that's probably where you want to look at making changes for your courses. And again, these exams, if your students pass them, are for the modern desktop administrator role. And if they pass both those exams, then your students would be Microsoft 365 certified, so the Modern Desktop Administrator Associate certificate. So when we look at the types of candidates, here's the types of candidates that Microsoft's looking at taking the course. So a Modern Desktop Administrator is going to be able to deploy Windows 10, make sure that it's secure, be able to manage it, and monitor Windows 10 devices and monitor client applications. And again, as we start moving into the 101, you'll see how Microsoft is bringing into the certification things like Autopilot to automatically do some of this management, Windows Defender with profiles and so forth, so that those things can be automated as the administration services are being done. And so students will have to prepare for that to be able to negotiate the new certifications. The second is Microsoft is looking for candidates for the certification that manage things like identity, access, policies, updates, and applications, and that they help design and implement device strategies that really meet modern organization needs and enterprise needs. So let's look at what Microsoft's looking at and what motivated their changes. And this should give you some ideas of how you would perhaps like to update your courses as you take into account the new certifications. So Microsoft is looking at modern IT. So they're looking at multiple device platforms. And we'll talk about this in a couple of different places. No longer do people just work on desktops in their offices. They may have a desktop. They may have laptops that are throughout their offices. They may also have cell phones, kiosks, tablets. And interestingly enough, some of this hardware may be user owned, so things that users bring into work. Other things may be business owned. So again, the modern IT administrator has to be able to manage this multiple device platform and also the devices being user and business owned. The other thing that's interesting is a lot of people now with the gig economy are doing second jobs and so forth. Some of you may be teaching, for example, as adjunct faculty, where you're doing work for your business, and that may be your primary vocation. And then secondary, you may be doing it for a university. And with the new software and applications that Microsoft's pushing, being able to recognize you and being able to manage that. Also, cloud managed and SaaS applications, and having it be automated so that you're not having to send out administrators to a particular person's office or location to get them set up, that can be automated through cloud automation, and that it's proactive and self-service. So as we look at where 697 and 698 is, we just got, actually, there's a little bit of feedback. We want to make sure that everyone has their speakers off. So if you have a speaker on, maybe turn that off. Good. So hopefully that will help with the feedback. Thanks for that input. So as Microsoft was looking at 697 and 698, they looked at a classic IT structure. So single device, business owned, again, corporate networks, legacy apps, manual, reactive, and high touch. So one of the things that they're doing is looking at the new modern architecture. So again, multiple devices, it's user and business owned, cloud managed, automated, proactive, and self-service. So one of the things that they're looking at is this change in architecture and why we're seeing this certification move to a cloud-based certification. The second thing besides architecture that they're looking at is really how they want to service organizations and service users in the future. And so if we look at the value pillars of Microsoft as they're looking at Windows 10, they're really looking at four things with Windows 10. One is intelligent security built in. The other is that it's easy to deploy and manage. And besides the easy deployment and management, again, also reducing the cost of deployment and management. So again, as you prepare students for certification, you'll see a lot of automation, a lot of systems now doing some of this administration work through profiles and setting up security and so forth. They want the applications always up to date, and so you'll see the auto publishing. And then they want proactive insights, and so there's a lot more reporting through Microsoft's BI on what's going on within the Windows 10 architecture that administrators will need to be able to know how to do. So when we look at intelligent security built in, administrators are going to have to help protect against security threats, safeguard the company data access, and again, across PCs, phones, tablets, kiosks, whatever devices people are using to access an organization's IT infrastructure and architecture, and also be able to enable solid security with simplified management. So when we look at this pillar, here's some of the software now that Windows is looking at making sure that students have competency on as they're working for the Modern Desktop Administrators certification. So you can see things like Windows Defender Advanced Threat Protection. And so when we get into the objectives, you'll see that software. Microsoft Intelligent Security Graph, so some of the reporting, the threat analytics, device guard, and so forth. So all of these are the protection that Microsoft wants to build in to this automated environment to make sure that it is safe and secure, and students will need to be able to work with it in the new cloud-based applications to pass certification. Now, the second thing is easy to deploy and manage, so managing user and devices with a single console, and then being able to simplify with a single login for all devices. So you can see with this single console, Microsoft's really moving away from sending administrators to people's offices or locations to do this administration. They want things done through a single console and with policies and setups that are automated. They also want it simplified with a single login for devices. I also teach for a university besides working for TestOut. At TestOut, when I log in with my TestOut credentials, it takes me to an Office 365 setup, the TestOut setup. That's all automatic. When I log into Office 365 with my university credentials, those different credentials take me to a whole new setup, different policies, different securities, different things that I can see as a user. all done with single sign-on. Administrators don't have to do that. That's what's in this new cloud architecture where Microsoft's moving. And then quickly setting up new employees to get them going. So when we look at that ease of deployment, then we can see software applications like Intune. And with Intune, it's been around for a while, but Microsoft has actually updated it and moved it more into the cloud base. Autopilot, you'll see as well, and you'll see in the objectives, Office click and run. So these types of applications are what's supporting in the objectives this easy to deploy and manage. And then always up to date, making sure that the latest creativity, teamwork, and really security functionality is delivered to users, that's always updated, and that automatic updates provide reduction in IT management overhead, and that everyone throughout the organization is scheduled appropriately for the appropriate updates, so that organizations don't have some users on some versions of Windows, other users on other versions. And so it helps streamline making sure that everything is up to date and everyone's on the appropriate version. So when we look at software for that, it's Office 365 Pro Plus and Windows 10. And again, that makes sure that the appropriate updates are sent throughout the enterprise. And then proactive insights, and this is where more reporting comes into play. So being able to upgrade, plan your upgrades and make sure that there's readiness. Microsoft's building reporting in and intelligence into the cloud-based environment to help administrators to make sure that they're ready for upgrades and to plan those upgrades. And so the students will need to be able to work with those reports and the upgrade planning portions of this. And then being able to ensure update and anti-malware compliance as well. So really being able to harness data to create proactive insights and have that data look throughout the system. And if you get, as you get a chance to work in some of the cloud-based applications as you're preparing to teach your students, the cloud-based security reporting is excellent. You'll enjoy being able to see who's perhaps having their accounts being accessed by people that aren't supposed to access them. There's different attack types of scenarios that you can set up for your students so that they can then see that reporting. So with that, then with the proactive insights, when you look at the objectives as you're updating your class, then things like Windows Analytics to make sure the upgrade's ready, to make sure that you can do health checks and compliance checks, and then to check things like security, who's trying to access, and so forth. So that's what Windows is trying to push. Now let's look a little bit at the modern desktop architecture. And again, I think this will help with your students. So gone are the days where students are administering, again, a single desktop and a single desktop image for their organization for all the employees, or even laptop images that are trading out desktops. Now you have individual PCs or multiple PCs. There may be shared kiosks. There may be multiple mobile devices. So you may have tablets, you may have two-in-ones, you may have phones as well that people are working on with the applications and doing it from any place. So you've got the Windows 10 Enterprise architecture and Windows 10 S. And again, with Windows 10 S, that's making all of the devices look like Windows 10 and being secured as if they're Windows 10 devices. And again, that streamlines this modern desktop device scenario that Microsoft's looking at. And then really Microsoft Intune to go ahead and manage those devices. So when we start looking at what this looks like for your classes, on the left side, we've got Windows 10. So those are the traditional types of things that you would have taught before in terms of Windows 10 administration. Then you've got your enterprise mobility and security, and again, moving to that cloud environment. And then on the right-hand side, you've got deployment flexibility. So the automated deployments, the automated policies, automated security, again, so that the cloud applications can do that. And then really being able to protect corporate data with Windows 10. And again, you see the device protection and what Microsoft Intune is doing there with BitLocker, Device Guard, and so forth. And then the data separation with enterprise data protection, again with Microsoft Intune, and then leakage protection and sharing protection with your rights management on Azure Rights Management. So what we tried to give you an idea of is what's motivating Microsoft to change the certification, why they're changing the certification, and really the move to the client applications. The so what for you as faculty is that you'll need to be able to learn those applications if you haven't worked a lot in the cloud yet. And you'll also have to be able to set up scenarios that are cloud-based. So as you're setting up things like security policies or automation policies, that you set up policies for your students to see, and then you have devices that those policies are working on, whether they be mobile devices or what have you, so that the students can see those effects of the policies and what happens as you teach them and as you give them hands-on experience with that. The next thing that we want to look at now is what does the platform look like? I'm going to turn the time over to Craig to take you through some of the cloud-based sides of the platform. We assumed in getting ready for this that you're all pretty savvy with Windows 10, but with some of the cloud applications being new, Craig wants to give you an idea of what some of those look like so you can start getting a feel for those as you pick them up and work with them. Craig.
Thanks, Ken. As Ken mentioned, we're all pretty familiar with the Windows 10 tools, and the MD100 course, or the objectives for MD100, are pretty similar to what we're all familiar with as far as the Windows 10 applications and the applications that are on the Windows 10 box. But when you move into the new MD101 objectives, we begin to see a lot of the cloud-based applications. And so I just wanted to give you a brief look at each one of those, because we're all familiar with the MMC console apps and Active Directory users and computers and those things, but when it comes to the cloud-based apps, that's a new territory for a lot of us. So this one is the Microsoft 365 Device Management Console, basically the Intune console. It's a little small there, but if you can see on the left, this is where they handle device enrollment and device compliance and configuration, also client apps and software updates in this one. As you can see, it's also a web-based tool that is multi-layer and multi-menu. A lot of different menus there that allow us to, that allow you to configure a lot of things. So it's a very complex tool that's going to be a little difficult for us to be able to manage getting students through those. This one is the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. Very similar, as you can see on the left-hand side there, this is where you would manage autopilot and active users and pieces of those. I'm going to go to the next slide here. This is a little lower down on the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. The interesting thing about this is they've consolidated a lot of the management tools together, and you can get to all of them, most all of them at least, from within the Microsoft 365 Admin Center. But you can see that each one of these squares on the screen is a new management console that is new and different and web-based and complex and multi-layered in its function. This one is the Azure Active Directory Admin Center. As we're all familiar with Active Directory users and computers and sites and services and local users and computers, but there's a new look and feel for how we manage Active Directory also. And this one finally is the Windows or the Microsoft Defender Security Center, where Defender has expanded into multiple roles. It used to be just kind of malware and antivirus, but it's now Credential Guard and Exploit Guard and a lot of different pieces that are new and different, and that's managed from within, once again, a web-based application in the cloud that allows us to manage those pieces also. So you can see the challenge of, when you're teaching a class and you have local computers, you can let students work on the local computers, but when you move to a cloud-based environment, you have cloud-based tools that need to be available for the students to be able to do those courses. So we'd like to go next into a quick high-level view of how the objectives have changed from 697 and 698 to the MD 100 and MD 101 objectives. So first we're going to look at which objectives are pretty well dropped out of the 697, 698 objectives. So this is from 697, some of the highlights of what's been removed, just for your information. A good portion of the support, authentication, and authorization have been removed. As you can see, home group and credential manager. The client-side Hyper-V that was in the previous objectives is now not there anymore. And a lot of the mobility options, as you can see, Windows to Go and Wi-Fi Direct. And a good portion of the support data storage and data security has also been removed from the 697 objectives. Remember that 697 is the managing Windows devices course. So from 698, which is the installing and configuring Windows 10 course, these are the objectives that are no longer there. Interestingly enough, configuring devices and device drivers, so your typical device driver configuration with Device Manager, configuring storage, so storage management with disk management, monitoring Windows, a reliability monitor, and some of those things have been dropped from the objectives. And then some of the more advanced management tools that we're familiar with, like the MMC consoles and pieces that are a little more legacy, have also been dropped from the objectives. So with that, we also provided you with the document that's in the handouts there, and most of you should have received that if you registered before this morning. You should have gotten the handout, and it actually goes through the objectives in more detail. What we just talked about was a little bit of a high level, but you can see the very specific details of what's been removed and what's new and such from that document. So what's staying in the 697, 690 from what was in 697 and 698, the topics that are still covered in MD 100 and MD 101. You'll notice that the Windows Store and Cloud apps is staying. Migrating user data, Intune is pretty heavy with the mobile device management. IP networking and network settings is always important. And supporting desktop apps and always recovery and managing updates are important from those 697 objectives. Those are the topics that will still continue to be carried forward into the new courses. So from 698, the Windows 8 course, these are the topics that are staying. As you can see, managing Windows in an enterprise environment, because that's kind of the key of where things are moving, that we're not just a desktop support, but we want to manage the entire environment. Networking, as you can see, data access, implementing apps, and as always, data recovery and updates are important for the students moving forward. So what objectives are new? So looking at the MD 100 and the MD 101 objectives, in MD 100, that's pretty well very similar in scope to the 698 course as far as the Windows 8. There have been a couple of new things added, and as you can see, there's two kind of key pieces that are new, and they're both sub-objectives. So configuring the local registry, they haven't ever covered the actual registry and regedit before in the courses. That's new, and configuring mobile networking is new to the course. But for the most part, all the rest of the objectives in MD 100 were previously covered in either 697 or 698, mostly 698. So there's a little bit more now as we move into the MD 100 side of things. That's the modern desktop architecture piece. You can see that there's a lot of new cloud-based things that pop up into the MD 101 objectives. So we talked about autopilot, as Ken mentioned, some of the applications that are important. Co-management and conditional access and compliance policy for devices, all of those Intune kind of things, and the device profiles and user profiles. Managing Windows Defender. We've had Windows Defender, as I mentioned, as a kind of more of a local malware application, but now it's into Application Guard and Credential Guard and all those other functions of Windows Defender that are new. And deploying and updating applications, specifically the Office 365 Pro Plus side of things, the whole Office 365 environment and that cloud-based Office environment, and then mobile application management. Now, this kind of a whole, like I mentioned, a high-level overview, but each one of these topics has a lot of detail as far as the specifics of each one of those applications. So I'm going to go ahead and turn the time back to Ken here to talk about the potential topics for courses moving forward.
Thank you, Craig. So what we wanted to do in this section is to give you a roadmap of what you might want to consider as you lay out your course for the different sections. So with Windows 10 and the MD100 portion of your course, some of the things that you would want to look at with your students are installing Windows 10. So going through the installing and updating of Windows 10 and the post-implementation configuration and personalization of the environment. And then also configuring Windows 10, so looking at configuring peripherals and drivers, configuring networking, and configuring storage. And interestingly enough, as I look at my classes and configuring storage, it's kind of different now. It used to be in the past, as Microsoft approached this, and as you were going ahead and doing the administration for it, it was okay, start up Windows, and now go ahead and format your hard drive. As you're configuring storage now, it's more configuration in getting things set up so that that's automatic for the user, so that the user isn't having to think about that. The administrators aren't, that they can just plug in and start working. So it's interesting to see some of those changes, in particular some of the ones I've seen with configuring storage. And then managing applications in Windows 10. Also protecting Windows 10, so configuring authorization and authentication, data access and usage, and having your students look at the advanced management tools, and then maintaining Windows 10, supporting the Windows 10 environment, and then troubleshooting the OS, troubleshooting files and applications, and hardware and drivers. Now again, as we've talked about during the webinar, your material for MD100 will be very similar to what you've done in the past. There will be some updates as some of these things have changed within the Windows 10 environment, particularly as you look at settings to get some of the things, some of the menu and pathing changes. But a lot of the material that you've had in the past will work with not much adaptation for your students. Where the adaptation's really going to come is looking at deploying the modern desktop. So as you look at your MD 101 portion of the course, if you teach to the MD 101 objectives in your course, really helping the students understand how to deploy the modern desktop, so how to plan operating system deployments and strategies. Again, because the strategies are enterprise-wide on the deployments, a lot more planning has to go into that, and then setting up those plans to be implemented by the cloud-based applications. Then implementing Windows 10 and managing updates for Windows 10. And then managing modern desktop devices is the next objective that you can consider looking at with your students. So things like device enrollment, configuring profiles, making sure profiles are set up appropriately for users and appropriately for roles, and application management. This is one of the areas that's also very interesting. Besides talking to a lot of university professors and high school and K-12 teachers on what they want in their courses, we also talk to industry. And one of the key pieces of feedback that we've gotten from industry is as they're trying to train their administrators and their employees, they're having a hard time going through the configuring of profiles and configuring of roles, especially as those definitions then are taken care of across the enterprise. I was talking to one administrator from a Fortune 500 company last week, and he made the comment that everyone's in for all the new profiles and roles as long as it's for someone else's employees. We don't want to work in that box. So as you're working with your students, helping them understand how to configure those roles and profiles, but also doing it in an enterprise environment so that the organization adopts it, accepts it, and that the technology then moves organizational business goals forward. And then the last objective to consider as you look at your course is protecting the modern desktops and devices. And again, think about now you've got user-owned devices and customer-owned devices and company-owned devices, being able to protect them all the way through the value chain of your organization as those different devices are being used. So things like managing authentication in Azure AD, managing devices and device policies, and managing securities. So as you start road mapping out your course for MD100 and MD101, as you're making the changes in your course material for the certifications, here's some of the objectives and perhaps things that you might want to consider covering with your students as you lay out the format for your course. Now, the other thing to consider as we go ahead and look at how we want to change the client courses is as we look at MD100 and 101, as you can tell, there's a lot of material that's been taken out. There's material that's been updated and a lot of new material added. This makes it a little bit different for us when we go through update cycles. Typically, when we go through an update cycle for a certification, course size generally stays in the same ballpark. But as we've described for you in this webinar, the changes to MD100 and 101, you can start seeing that the size is going to be a little bit different. So here's some of the things that we're thinking as we go ahead and approach how we want to change our Client Pro course that you may want to consider as you're looking at your course and how you approach MD100 and 101. So as we look at the aggregate, so in other words, what things have been taken out of 100 and 101, what things have been updated, and what things need to be added, we're looking at a potentially 25 to 35% larger course. So as you do some of your course planning, and as you have the constraints of your semesters and of how your organizations have your semesters and scheduling laid out, you need to think about how are you going to handle the larger amount of material, what things might you want to include, what things maybe not include as much so that you can fit things within the size that the course will potentially be. The other thing to think about is oftentimes when updates happen, as faculty members, we only have to learn what's been changed in the software. So what's new, how does it work, how are we going to demo it? With this particular course, because the content, especially in the MD101 portion, has really shifted to cloud-based, the look and feel of the software and applications are totally different. As Craig went through it, you can see that they're Windows-based, they're multi-layer, multi-portal. Also, as you get into it a little bit more, you'll notice that Windows Portal is even configurable for the organization as an enterprise or different parts of the organization. So as you look at all of these new complexities, not only do you have to think about learning them, but how are you going to change the scenarios that you use in your classroom to teach the students? How are you going to set up your labs there? And how are you going to take those through in the new environment? Again, the MD100 pieces will be fairly similar, not a big shift, but as you approach the client-based side, which is mostly in 101, think about that as you're doing things. So new architectures and applications that you'll need to be comfortable with so that you can guide your students through those sections of your course. So that's the course material that we have. At this point, we want to ask you some polling questions. Once we've finished the polling questions, then we'll open it up for answering the questions that you might have submitted to us during the webinar and any other questions that you have. So for this next poll question, if you're teaching a Windows 10 course, how would you cover MD100 and MD101? And so as the poll comes up, it's going to take you through either one or two questions based on what you're doing to get that information from you. And that'll help us to understand how as faculty you're going to be teaching your classes with the MD100 material and the MD101 material. So Adam, how are we doing with the poll question?
All right, so we've most responded. We closed that. It looks like it's about half-half between covering both 100 and 101 and having 100 with some topics from 101 and then about 10% doing just MD 100.
Oh, good. Excellent. Thank you for that feedback. At this point, we want to open it up for questions. I know Adam. Oh,
we do have one more poll question just as a follow-up to that last one. If you are teaching both of the MD 100 and 101 content, would you teach this as a single course or would you teach it as a separate course? And that's just a yes or no if it's a single course. So that should be up on your screen right now.
Good.
And it looks like a little more than half will be doing it as a single course and about 44% there not as a single course.
Okay, thank you again for those results. That helps us as we do our planning for what our Client Pro course will look like in the future as we go ahead and take into account these changes and what they do to the design of the course. So at this point, Adam, I know that you've been keeping track of questions that have been asked through the webinar. If you want to bring those up, and then we'll go ahead and answer them.
All right, and before I have the questions, one thing as we develop our new Client Pro course that is very helpful to us, if you could send a copy of course syllabus or learning objectives to my email, it's on the screen right now, that's akeys@testout.com, and that just helps us know what content you'll be covering and how we can best adapt our courses to your needs, so that'd be great. I do have a few questions here that have been asked. One of which is we covered this somewhat, but as a summary, what do you view as the largest change with the new Microsoft certification update?
I think for me, and again, thinking about this as not just and this is Ken, not just thinking about it as working for TestOut and changing the course, but also thinking about it as a faculty member and how that's going to affect my course. The biggest thing is to become comfortable and decide how you're going to guide your students through the cloud-based applications. Some of the cloud-based applications are to the forefront. Things like Azure and Windows Defender. As I look at preparing for my students, those are going to be some of the top ones I look at. For autopilot, maybe less so. Those things are more automated. So I'll probably look at them with the students a little bit less, not as much focus, but the big workhorse applications, so Windows Intune, Windows Defender, and then the Azure AD pieces, those are the ones that I want to focus on. And so if you're going kind of through the same thing this summer, thinking like I am getting ready for your classes, those would be ones that you would want to look at. And also remember, as you demonstrate those, not only do you need to do the setup demonstration, but you also need to show how those automatically work against devices. So make sure that for the setups, you're also looking at what devices. Is it a cell phone you're going to show the policy over? Is it a laptop? What type of roles are you going to show those policies over? So you need to show it not so much in a feature function type of way, but how the enterprise is going to be administering using those tools. Craig, additional thoughts that you have on that?
Yeah, I would have answered similarly that the cloud-based applications are definitely the biggest addition to the MD 101 and the biggest change from where we've been in the past.
The other thing with the cloud-based applications that came to my mind as Craig was answering is With the cloud-based applications as well, Microsoft launches at multiple points within those applications. So you'll also want to become comfortable with those launch points. So there'll be times when you're in certain part of the portal that you can go ahead and launch, certain parts of Intune that you can launch into other parts of the application. That's one of the things that I'm looking at as well. So when you're in Windows 10, where it was just getting settings down and the menus down on how to launch feature and function, as you're working in the cloud-based side, just take notice that you can launch a lot of the feature and functions and applications from multiple places. Your students will probably ask about that. Make sure you're comfortable with that as well too.
Okay. We have a whole lot of questions that are asking the updated TestOut course and availability is what their expectation is. And I can give a little answer on this. This is part of why we're having the webinar today, is to educate on what changes have happened with the Microsoft certifications and to get this into our development pipeline to meet your needs. So at this point, we don't have a release date for this. Can tell you that it would not be ready in time for the fall academic semester this year. And as a follow-up, there was a question on providing information for how the current Client Pro maps to these new certifications. Is that something we'd be able to do?
We're going to go ahead and look at that and prepare for that. That's information that we'll send out. We've actually got to start on that as we're going through the designing with the teams. As we get that more formalized, then we'll go ahead and make that document available to you.
And just as a rough number, we've looked at the current Client Pro against the new MD100 and MD101, and we pretty well have about 95% coverage on the MD100 objectives, and we have probably in the range to 30 to 35% coverage on the MD101 as it stands right now, but with updates needed.
Okay, thank you. The next question is if we have any suggestions for how instructors can see training material for 101 or gain access and use the cloud tools that we've shown.
That's a really excellent question. There's a couple of things that you can do, and one area is that I like looking at. If you go out to Microsoft's website and look at their partner section, they have some excellent presentations for partners to help the partners get ready for this change with their clients. That's been one of the areas that I've liked looking at for information about what is going to on what Microsoft's focusing on what they're stressing. The other thing that I would look at is Microsoft has their initial boot camp training ready, and they've sent those to the boot camp providers. They have some good overviews of what that training looks like on their website as well. And then the third thing that you can look at is many of your institutions have, and at least the institution I teach with, has an arrangement with Microsoft Imagine and their Imagine Learning. And so as a faculty member, you have free access to that if your organization has got into that program. And that gives you access to the software as well so that you can work with it and get to see it. And then the fourth area is that Microsoft also has free trials as well for companies looking at using that. That's another good way to look at that as well. And then the other thing that I've always find helpful is the IT organizations, both in the companies that I work for and both for the universities that I've taught at, they're going through the same changes as well. And so if you have relationships there with the IT departments, they're very good about helping you to understand things as they're going through them as well. Craig, other ideas on things to look at?
Yeah, same thing. Other that, just to be aware that some of the applications that are covered in the MD101 course they have different levels of cloud-based applications. A lot of companies will be like at an E3 level. Some of the applications that are covered in the MD101 course are at the E5 level. And I know that you can get at least a 60-day trial for some of the applications at the E5 level, and then They do charge after that for a per user license, but if you kept it down to one user, you could probably keep the cost pretty minimal.
Perfect. Also have the question of Client Pro rollover. If they purchase the new one, will actually, let me rephrase that. Sorry, I'm formulating two. So the question is, access to the current version, will it be cut off at some point while they roll over curriculum? We always have a rollover period. So typically that's around 6 months when we release a new version of a course to let curriculum be updated within schools to match that new content. So there will be a rollover once the new course is available. And then a question also along that line is, if students purchase Client Pro for fall, will they have access to the updated Client Pro? When that is available, if they have an active license, they would be able to, based on how you set up your course, and if you roll it to the new version, they would have access to that new content if they have an active license for the current version of Client Pro. The slideshow presentation will be available after this. We'll send out an email that has a link to the recording, so you can come back and view everything that's been covered. And with that, we'd like to give a big thanks to Ken and Craig for putting this information together, for digging in deep on the changes that have happened. Again, encourage you to send a copy of course syllabi or learning objectives to my email that's still on the screen, akeys@testout.com. And again, thank you very much for your time today. Thank you for our presenters and everybody who's joined in. And we look forward to providing updates on what we will be doing with this course. And if we have any questions, we'd love to reach out to all of you who've been on here. So keep an eye on your email. If we have any follow-up, we will send that out to you in the coming week or so. So thank you very much and have a great day.